Hello fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I'm going to be talking about the fourth book in the Southern Reach trilogy, Absolution by Jeff VanderMeer. This just came out a couple months ago in October, and I was lucky enough that I had just completed the third in the trilogy. So I was very lucky in that sense because Jeff VanderMeer wrote this expecting you to have read the three before it and to remember quite a few things from those. So the quick synopsis of this book, it is about things that happened in what becomes Area X in the future, but it's about things that happened prior to all the things that happen in the trilogy. So this is a prequel, and it starts right away with government involvement, although it's very confusing. And that's something that I find about Jeff VanderMeer when he talks about these government entities. They're always very confusing, the Southern Reach or Central. This one's more about Central. But it starts with a group of biologists who go to a place that they eventually name Dead Town. And all the local people are like, these are weird people. But anyway, they release a couple of, I think they're crocodiles or alligators, into the swamps of this area. And as time goes on, we learn that Central is doing some messed up hypnotism stuff to these people using the generator. But suddenly they start being inundated with these rabbits. And these rabbits are kind of weird. And a bunch of these rabbits are wearing strange cameras that almost seem to have a life of their own. And then eventually they start trying to kill all these rabbits because there's just so many of them. And I think they burn a bunch of them, and they're about to start killing a bunch more when suddenly this person comes out of the swamp or the forest or something and is coming across this clearing where they're going to kill a bunch more rabbits. And he's talking, but they can't hear what he's saying, but the words are affecting them hugely. And this being is labeled the Rogue. And this book is the story of old Jim, who was a character in the third Southern Reach trilogy book, Acceptance. And we don't really know he has anything to do with Central or is doing anything. We just think he's a bar owner that likes to play the piano. And we see his end when Area X first forms at the end of that novel. But it turns out he works for Central, and this is the story of him. And it is his job to go and find this rogue and see what it is, because Central can't figure out what this rogue is. Jim himself is obviously been tinkered with in his head by Central with all of this hypnotism and this kind of stuff. So the whole time it's very difficult to understand what is actually going on versus what is kind of going on in Jim's head. But Jim his daughter has left him a long time ago. His wife died. He doesn't really ever tell us or seem to remember how. That becomes important later in the book. But he's basically an alcoholic, and Central picks him up. He'd worked for Central for many years. He's a right-hand man to Jack, the guy that's kind of running Central at this point. They pick him back up. They get him therapy through Central, which is probably more, messing with the head, and send him to this area to find the rogue and see what the rogue is all about. They also send another agent to him that is like made up to look like his daughter. And it's not enough to fool him, of course. He knows it's not his daughter, but it's really messed up. Like Jack is just messing with old Jim. It's so weird. But yeah, it's the novel's kind of about working with her and just trying to figure out what is really Old Jim and what is Old Jim after Central has tinkered with it. Do I recommend this book? What works? The last 100 pages of this book is some of my favorite writing by Jeff VanderMeer. It's not as good as the end of Annihilation, but it is like right up there. The end of Annihilation is just a level of pure genius that I absolutely love, and this almost reaches that exact same height. For me, the 400 pages, 300 pages before the last 100 dragged. And they drag because Jeff VanderMeer is a really interesting writer. And I think when all is said and done, I like Jeff VanderMeer, but there's times when he is so purposely obscure with, I don't know if obscure is the right word. He's purposefully befuddling with his language, to the point that I know that he's creating mystery. And he's like Murakami in that sense. There's so much mystery in this. And I love mystery in writing. I love going, wow, what is that? But sometimes he can get mysterious to the point that it's just difficult to sit through. The best example I can give of that in this is this organization, Central, is so powerful, so strong, that there are two women who are in love, and they're part of this biology team that fought the rabbits and all that. And Central wants to question them, and they question them, and they don't come up with anything. But then they take each of them to abandoned islands far away from each other. They're the only humans on that island. And then they fly planes to these islands once a month to drop food. And the pilots are instructed to not try to talk to them. It doesn't matter if they're alive or dead. They still have to drop these supplies. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, how much money would this much of a dick move take? Right? I mean, this is insane. If they really didn't want them talking to the general public, they could kill them. They're Central. That could happen very easily. But instead, they create this elaborate... And I realized in my brain, and maybe this isn't true, Jeff VanderMeer really probably liked the heartbreaking image of these two lovers separated by this evil organization in this way. It seemed like to him such a tragic concept. And I get it. It is a tragic concept. That's awful for an organization to do that. But my question is, like, why? Why? And the answer doesn't matter. The answer is it was a cool image. But then later, everybody is pissed at old Jim and trying to get money back that Jack had sent him, and that Central really needs this money. And I was so confused, because if this organization is rich and powerful enough just to be evil to other people, and money doesn't matter, they can fly planes out there once a month even if these women are dead. But on the same note, like 4 bags of money is what they need to continue on that old Jim had. And even down to the first expedition, a large portion of the reason for the first expedition into Area X is so that they can try to find this money that apparently old Jim had, because Central needs that money so bad. That doesn't make any sense at all. It was really weird. So that's the kind of stuff in the lead up that really bugs me. Is I think Jeff VanderMeer is so visual, and his visuals are so beautiful, and he's into metaphor and he's into analogy, but sometimes he gets so into that reality just kind of takes a coffee break, and that's fine. One of the best things about Area X is at the beginning of the novel, they are walking into Area X, and the best part about that meant anything could happen. because it was Area X. It's a weird-ass place with no explanation. So all the weird shit that goes down in Annihilation makes sense to me because they're in a place where nothing makes sense. But when he gets into the reality, when he gets outside of Area X and we're dealing with the Southern Reach and Authority and Acceptance, or at times before Area X, some of the weirdness just doesn't really make that much sense. And that was the hard times I had with this novel. And honestly, I get bored with VanderMeer. Annihilation was, I think, on the Audible 6 hours long. That was the exact right amount of time. Everything after that has been over 10 hours, with this, I think, coming in almost at 15 hours. And that is too long, in my opinion, for this story. So, there you go. Okay, so what the hell happened in this novel? And that's the important part. And I am going to give an explanation, but it's going to be filled with plot spoilers. So from here on out, if you want to read this novel, know that you better do it. You better pause the video here and come back when you've read it. If you have read it and you're like, I don't quite know what went on, I'm going to give you my interpretation of it from here on out. So let's start with the rabbits. Right away, of course, and this was only because I had read this so recently. I thought of all the rabbits that Area X was pushing through at the very beginning. When Area X first dropped, they pushed all these rabbits through, and that happened in the book Authority. And they would put cameras on these rabbits. And one of the things that we know about Area X is that we don't know if it's actually on Earth. Which this is all from Acceptance. We also don't know when Area X is. When you walk through Area X, time is all messed up. In fact, I think at one point, the biologist and the Authority guy go into Area X right after Area X expands, and they've only been there a couple weeks, but then they meet somebody that disappeared into Area X like maybe 4 weeks before, and she's been in Area X for 2 years. Time doesn't play the same in there, so I was instantly really aware that these were the rabbits from the future, that once Area X closed, they were going to inundate the area with rabbits, trying to see what happened when you send things over the border. So I knew that these were kind of future rabbits. We also know that cameras get really messed up in Area X. We learned this in Authority when he's trying to watch the cameras from the first expedition, and suddenly they're like flying and all kinds of stuff. But the Rogue, I had a really hard time figuring out. The Rogue at one point attacks old Jim and undoes all the weird crap they've done to his brain. All the hypnosis and all that kind of stuff stops working, which is how old Jim stays alive and gets the money, is because the Rogue did a sonic attack where his words undid all the programming that Central had already put in him. And that's what the Rogue was doing to the biologists when they were going to kill the rabbits. He was undoing all of the hypnotizing Central stuff that they'd done to them. But the question of who the Rogue was really, really wild. And it was kind of, for me, it wasn't that interesting, because what I came up with was, well, I guess this is one of the alien species that set up Area X. But then I thought back to Acceptance, where there's that lighthouse mirror, and they let out the spore from an alien planet that had traveled, so many miles that the aliens that the spore came from are dead by now. And I liked that so much better. It seemed weird to me to just have this alien entity. And then old Jim's story ends the way it does in Acceptance, with him playing piano and breaking his fingers while he's doing it. And I was like, okay, so I still don't know what the Rogue is. I still don't know what's going on. And then suddenly we change to the first expedition, and it's told from Lowry's point of view. And it's got a different voice in the writing. It's Lowry's voice, and Jeff VanderMeer does an incredible job at writing in different voices. I've heard him write in different voices, and they always seem a little different. But this one was so intensely different, and I think VanderMeer handled it very well. But at first, I was even kind of bored with this story because it was just them getting ready to go to Area X, and I find that I always just want Jeff VanderMeer's build up to the absolutely insane weird shit that's going to happen in his novels to be just shorter. His build-up is huge, but the payoff is always really good. Even in Authority, which is my least favorite of the 4 novels, there's this part where, like, I think it's Whitby is shoved himself on a shelf and his body has changed, and it's so terrifying. But anyway, they go, it's the first expedition. They go in with Lowry. It gets insane. Jeff VanderMeer kicks ass at writing. This is the last 100 pages. And suddenly I was like so in. The whole book I'd been like, oh my God, I don't know if I care about this. Do we need a prequel? But when this first expeditions, when they finally get into Area X, ooh, it is terrifying cosmic horror that is so worth it. It's wild. And things just get weirder and weirder, and they separate, and things get weirder and weirder until it comes to a point where Lowry goes into this room in Dead Town, this secret room, and in it he finds a body, and there's a piece of paper on top of the body, and on the piece of paper it says, "Don't eat me." And Lowry suddenly has this suggestion of eating this body put in his head. And Jeff VanderMeer writes this so incredibly. It just goes up and up and up and up. And suddenly he's like thinking of Thanksgiving feasts, and he can smell this body and this putrid, gross body. And then he starts eating it one leg at a time. And oh my God, it is some of the most well-described, gory, terrifying stuff that I've ever read. Well done. At the point that I was listening to it, I was like, okay, this is worth the 13 hours of, well, maybe 10, 11 hours of leading up to this. Wow. Terrifying. Anyway, he keeps eating more and more and more and more, and eventually he gets up to the head. And he pulls this, I think there's a helmet or a cloth over the head or something. He pulls it off, and it's Whitby that he's been eating. Now, there's a time, I think it's Authority. Yeah, it's Authority, when Whitby goes into Area X with the director of the Southern Reach. And we know that he's doubled when he's in there, but we don't know what happens to original Whitby. And this is what happens to original Whitby. But the more we read, the more we learn that this isn't completely Whitby. This was like a cast-off molt of Whitby. And then he starts turning green, and he gets scales, and he's flashing all around Area X. He doesn't know where he is at most times. And the real brilliance of this novel comes out when it turns out he is the rogue. Lowry is the rogue. Area X wants to be Area X through all time. And because time is wonky in Area X starts to attack all times, if that makes sense. So the rabbits go back in time, trying to spread Area X-ness, and it's not like Area X is a thinking thing that has a plan. It's just kind of presented that Area X spreads out all ways into all different times. So it's going to be weird no matter what part of time it's in, because stuff can flash in and out of existence through time that has ever been in Area X. And the rogue is basically a rabbit like that. It's something that came into Area X later and then flashes back into time. So really, it's people dealing with the first expedition into Area X before the first expedition into Area X takes place, before Area X is even formed. And that, to me, is an awesome premise, and it made the Rogue so much cooler. So that might have been my fault, that I wasn't as interested in the Rogue, because I thought erroneously that it was just an alien, because I couldn't, my brain just, I couldn't think. I literally saw the rabbits going back in time, but couldn't imagine that the Rogue went back in time. Oh, so also the Rogue has merged with the alligator, and that's why it molts skin. So the first one was Whitby. The first Rogue was Whitby, and then when he ate the molt, which was a mix of the alligator or crocodile and Whitby, he becomes this kind of rogue mix of the crocodile and the person. So that is what I think is going on in Absolution by Jeff VanderMeer. Basically, Area X is sending stuff from the future to the past to mess with Area X, and that's how all this weird shit happens before Area X even came into existence. And Jeff VanderMeer handles this beautifully, especially the last 100 pages. But man, I know one of you said you were halfway through it in the comments, and that you were going to keep on because of kind of what I said about it. And I hope that that is good for you. I hope it is, because for me, the last 100 pages, I forgave Jeff VanderMeer for the first 300. But it is a slog. It is really, really a slog to get to, for me to get through those first 300. This is kind of what I feel about Jeff VanderMeer all the way around, is that when he's on for me, he's spot on. He is... I mean, his Annihilation was one of my top 10 books last year. Absolutely incredible. But when he's talking about reality, I find his characters very difficult to connect to. They all seem super weird. They don't think like the way I would expect people to think, and the organizations almost seem weird for weird's sake, and I don't know. It's all a little bit chaos, and it's all a little bit hard for me to read. But then suddenly there'll be moments in it that's just like, man, the whole book was worth it for this moment. And that's what happens in this one, the last 100 pages. That scene of him eating Whitby's molt, wow, it was insane. It was so well done. All right, there you go. That's my review and explanation of what is going on in Absolution. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please click like. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe, because I'll be making a lot more of it in the future. If you'd like to further support this channel, go check out our Patreon. I put videos up there exclusively and quite often, so there's more content to be had. Give it a look. All right, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.